Right, let's start making the graph to sort of get this working. Bifrost graph editor I've got here. Let's get rid of my outline for the time. Actually, I'll leave it there, I'll need it. Right, so let's just create the graph. So output, input, don't need an input because I'm going to drag in my own ones. I can leave that one there. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make a tab, simulation, npm, and we want a simulate npm. There aren't any basic setups for this because they have so many different variables. I don't think they can sort of do one basic setup, so we have to sort of make it ourselves, but that's fine, it's easy. So simulate npm, so that's this guy, and as you can see it's got a lot of different outputs for the different types of npm we can do, but it's still got the same sort of sources, colliders, influences and settings. Right, so let's do the first thing first. Let's make a settings. So create node, npm solver settings. Right, so now we want to make our sources. So we're going to do one for sand, one for water, one for snow, and one for cloth. So when you right click the sources, you can see we have snow, sand, fluid and cloth. We also have a fiber, which we'll look at a bit later on. So let's do one for snow, like that, and then let's do one for sand, and one for fluids, and finally one for cloth. Okay, let's just hit L on that. So when you hit L, when nothing's selected, it lays out the graph. So right, so we've got snow, sand, fluid, and cloth. So if we have a quick look at them, just very quickly. So, oops, got the parameters. So for snow, we've got general standard sort of ones. We've got some particle settings, which we'll get into in a bit. Some snow properties. So this is the properties for snow. If I click on sand, you can see it has similar ones, but snow has a few more. Basically hardening, initial firmness, I think, is the only difference. Yeah. So the snow difference to sand is you get a thing called hardening and initial firmness. Then if you look at sand, we don't have that, but we have these ones, which I'll go through. Fluids has similar ones to sand, but has a thing called surface tension rather than volume preservation. And cloth has some different settings of thickness, collision speeds. What else does it have? Different collision speed, max, and also interior volume and tearing. So you can see that they're all similar, but they all have slightly different attributes. Right, so let's bring in our meshes to set them up. So for my snow, I want to bring in my snow mesh. So just middle mouse that in. Connect that to the geometry, and while we're here, I'm just going to do right click, create node, set property, and we'll give it a color. So to do that, if you missed last week's particles or you haven't watched those yet, we need to sort of define a color parameter. And that is called C, oops, not capitals, COLOR, so color spelled in the American way. And then we have to give it a value which makes sense for a color, which is an RGB, so that's 3 numbers. So we have to just right click our value, go value type, and we say math float 3, like that. So now we have these 3 values. So my snow, I'll make white. So this is a 0 to 1 value. So 0 being black, 1 being white, or 0 being not red, 1 being full red, because these are RGBs. So if you put all of these to 1, we'll get white. So next one is going to be my sand, and middle mouse my sand in, connect that to geometry. I'm just going to duplicate this one by Control C, Control V, and plug that into my sand. And I'm just going to make this one a sort of browny colour. 0.8 and 0.8. So just basically some colour in the red and the green makes a sort of what's the word? I can't think. Like a tan colour. Beige is what I was trying to think of. Right, so we've done that. I'll hook those up in a minute. Actually, I'll just go through and finish this. So fluids, we've got a fluid one. Middle mouse that. Drag him in. Control C, Control V for our colour. That one. And change that to 0 for red, 0 for green, and 1 to be blue. And then and the last one we'll do is cloth. We'll middle mouse that in, and we'll just connect that. We don't need to make a colour for that one because we're using a material on that and it'll inherit that colour. Right, so set those up. Let's hit L again just to sort of straighten it all out a bit. So now we've got to just sort of plug in our colliders. So we've got our pit mesh and our snow cutter. So let's bring in the pit mesh. And I'm just going to hit tab and start typing collider. Get that up. Plug that in there. Plug that into our colliders. So maybe I'll zoom in a bit there. So plug that into geometry. Plug the collider into colliders. Let's change the parameters in here. So we've sort of looked at colliders before. Generally, you want to change it from relative to absolute to get real world sort of sizes. And we'll leave it at the standard detail size for the time being. I'm just going to bring my snow cutter in, and I could just link that into there, and they would both be made into a collider, which is fine. Sometimes you might want to have separate collider nodes so you can sort of play around with different bounciness and frictions and things like that. So I'm just going to Control C, Control V, that one. Plug him in there. And plug, oops. If your sort of thing you want to plug into is off screen, you can just, if you just left click on that, don't click and drag, just left click, sort of gets the connection, and then you can just, either middle mouse in here and just move around, and then we can just plug it in. So, right, what have I done with my output? There's my output. So let's connect these up so you can see we've got some different outputs here. So granular particles is for anything sand, fluid and snow. So we just plug that one straight out. Cloth will be for, sand, fluid, yeah, cloth will be cloth. These ones, the fibre ones, we're going to look at. The shell one is similar to the cloth, but it sort of makes, let me just see if it says anything about it. Weirdly, there has nothing written about it, so which is a bit weird. It's a cloth mesh, but I think it's stiffer. So you can vaguely do rigid body stuff with it, but not quite. You can do things like playing cards. I've seen a demo for playing cards being flipped about. We may look at it. I've not really looked into it too much myself, but it also it sims a lot slower than the other ones. You can also, if you wanted to, look at your out colliders and see how they're working. So if I plug that in, I might see that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Processing. No, can't see it for some reason. H, no. So yeah, I'm not sure. That one does sometimes work, sometimes. Anyway, it gives you a sort of volumized version of your colliders for debugging. I think. Well, that's what I've used it for. Let me see. Outliners connects the graph out to visualize the geometry used for collisions. Yeah, but for some reason doesn't seem to be working. Like that. So, important ones to know: granular particles for sand, fluid, and snow. Cloth mesh. Right. So as you can see, let's get rid of this. We've now got our white snow, our sort of yellowy sand, and our blue fluid. And if we hit play, we'll get this. And as you can see, the sort of sand, the fluid, and the snow all act differently. They've all got their sort of own special parameters to sort of mimic these sort of real world types. There we go. Right, so in the next videos we'll sort of delve in a bit deeper.